Jets GM Joe Douglas, often referred to as a guy who had one good draft class and has made his name off of that. I'm Glenn Norton with JetNation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. So the reason I'm doing this one, just funny coincidence, I was looking at the Jets 2021-2022 draft classes a few days ago and saw some things that were really impressive. There's the obvious with the monster class, the Sauce, Garrett, JJ, Breeze class. And then I saw something pop up just a few minutes ago on the forums at jetnation.com. And as I said, most active forum, tons of great stuff on there. And someone started a thread. And like I said, this is with me having been thinking just a day or two ago about the 22 or about the 21 and 22 draft classes. And someone started a thread. Let's see who it was. Otherwise Happy in Life forum name here for this thread. And the thread is 2023 Jets draft class taking a big step forward. Which I thought, okay, there are some guys in that class that I really like, but there are a lot of guys, to me, that aren't playing enough to really judge. But let's just look. Will McDonald, second in the NFL with 5 sacks. He's gotten much better. He's on his way up. We know that. Joe Tippmann looking like he could be one of the best centers in the NFL. I talked about that yesterday. Carter Warren hasn't played this year, and I like Carter Warren, and I've said that I like him as a developmental guy. I would have been more comfortable with him as a backup this year than most people would, and that's fine. But I think he's a guy they got to steal. But in terms of this year, he hasn't played, and he may not play. Zaire Barnes had himself a fantastic camp. I think he's playing himself into a role next year, so good job there. Jarek Bernard Converse, another one, had a really good training camp, and moving forward. So again, it's not that these guys aren't trending in the right direction. Bernard Converse, Barnes, and Warren. We just haven't seen them in regular season action. So it's like, okay, maybe not. Let's pump the brakes on that. I say all the time, I'm still one of the old school. Give me 3 years to judge a draft class. With exceptions being the Sauce, Garrett, JJ class, Breeze class, because that class is so good, and they've been so good from day one that you're like, all right, that's a good class. I don't need another year. I don't need a larger sample size. I know that is an incredible draft class. So Joe Douglas, like I said, he gets a lot of credit for that. And the thing is, I understand some of the stuff I'm about to say some people will disagree with, because there are a lot of people who feel like if you're not a superstar, you're not a hit. If you're a backup, a special teamer, then you're a bust and you're a scrub and you're the worst. But not everybody thinks that way. I don't think that way. I think that it's okay to have guys who are average to slightly below average starters or backups, because every roster has those guys. And Dylan Terman and I did a show this offseason where we looked at every single Joe Douglas draft pick, not just the 2 years, but every pick he's made. And we talked about how NFL draft hit rate is right around 50%. I think it's like 53% of players actually stick for a little bit. A lot of those guys are gone within a couple of years. And of those that remain, a lot of those guys are just backups. Like, getting high-level starters to elite players, insanely rare. Insanely rare. But fans look at those guys who make it and go, why can't all of our picks do that? Look, this team, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, why can't we find a starting quarterback in the set? Like, you can't treat the exception. And in this case, like true exceptions, you can't treat them like the rule. The rule with the NFL draft is that roughly, listen, whether it's 53%, 54%, let's call it half. Half of all draft picks are gone within a year or two. How many of them start and become elite? Obviously, even a much smaller number. So keeping that in mind, not having unrealistic expectations, not expecting the NFL to be like Madden, where I can draft 10 dudes and they all make the Pro Bowl as rookies. Let's put that aside and let's live in reality for a minute. In a world where 53% of picks don't make it, and even fewer of those, the ones that do, make it to the very high levels. I'm talking, if you are a contributor, so what I'm counting here, looking at these 2 years of Joe Douglas draft picks, focusing on starters. I'm not worried about elite, Pro Bowl, all pro. Starter/primary backup, um, on an NFL roster, and I included on a practice squad because there's only one guy, and he's actually had a productive career when he's played. So he showed he can play in the league. But let's look at the numbers real quick. From 2021 to 2022, Joe Douglas drafted 17 players. Those players: Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, Brees Hall, Jeremy Ruckert, Max Mitchell, Michael Clemens, Zach Wilson, Elijah Vera Tucker, Elijah Moore, Michael Carter, Jamian Sherwood, Michael Carter II, Jason Pinnock, Namza Hazreldine, Brandon Eccles, and Jonathan Marshall. 17 players in total. Of those 17, as of right now, 10 of them are NFL starters. And the reason I'm including, because this is important to a piece that I discussed, I wrote earlier this offseason, saying that, Joe Douglas, are we going to see a shift in philosophy? And I think we already have seen the shift, avoiding guys like Elijah Moore, who was a talented player. He's a starter for the Browns, but kind of a locker room cancer guy. Michael Carter, who I think was a fantastic person and football player. Well, good football player. But I think maybe a little too much with the locker room politics. And if you listen to the show, you've heard me say it before. I don't think it's a coincidence that they released Michael Carter the day after a players only meeting. Like, I think he spoke up and said some things that rubbed people the wrong way and was let go of the phone, like within hours of the meeting. So you can tell me that was a coincidence, but I'm not going to believe you. So you've got that. That's the class there. The previous year, I mentioned them all already. Or did I? No, Zach, Elijah Vera Tucker. I can't remember how far I got on the list. I did do the whole list. Sorry. Getting old. Still a little bit sick. So of the 17, 10 starters. That's phenomenal. 10 out of 17. And you can say, oh, Glenn, but Michael Clemens, low-end starter, only starting because Reddick is. I get it. This stuff balances out. I can say back to you, Jamian Sherwood, good enough to be a starter, but he's not, because Mosley is a veteran with the respect and the captaincy. He's good enough to start. As far as the guys who aren't here anymore, who are starting, Elijah Moore, again, character. That's something they have to get better at evaluating. It appears they have. Michael Carter, running back. He's the only guy who's a practice squad guy with the Cardinals. And honestly, I think he's like a 4.3 yards per carry back for his career. He's an okay back. He'll probably be around for a little while. I don't think we've seen the last of him in NFL games. And I think he's been, he's good enough to be in the NFL. Jason Pinnock, the safety. You drafted him. Now he's starting for the Giants. But he's only gone because you took Tony Adams the previous year or the following year as a UDFA, and you liked him more. So it's like, well, we drafted this guy, but we just picked up another dude who we think is better. So we're going to let him go. Brandon Eccles, who we mentioned, backup corner. But let's go over that real quick, actually. So we know the starters: Sauce, Wilson, Johnson, Hall, Ruckert, tight end 2, starting some packages, but we'll call him a backup / starter. Max Mitchell, one of the only guys here, not rostered, not a primary backup. He's behind Carter. I would imagine he's behind Carter Warren, who was behind Olu Fashanu. Once you're getting 3-4 deep, we're gonna say you're a rostered player. Mitchell's a rostered player. Again, Clemens, starter / primary backup. ABT starter. Elijah Moore in Cleveland, starter. Michael Carter, starter. Jamian Sherwood, good enough to start, just blocked by Mosley. Michael Carter, the corner, not just a starter, but an elite starter. As we said, Pinnock, starter. Hamza Nasruddin, Jonathan Marshall, 2 of the only guys not in the league. I think the only 2 guys, in fact, no longer in the league. So out of 17 guys, you've got 10 starters, 3 primary backups, 1 guy on a roster, Max Mitchell, 1 guy on a practice squad, Michael Carter, and 2 guys no longer in the league, Hamza Nasruddin and Jonathan Marshall. Jonathan Marshall was actually with the Jaguars in the preseason. I thought he would stick in their practice. I thought he would stick with their practice squad. He did not. And what a weird situation that is. Everybody knows the numbers on him. 99th percentile. And his RAS is relative athletic score. The guy was literally like the highest graded, most athletic DT ever. You figured, and with this Jets coaching staff, all of the guys they've turned into players, and he's the guy they couldn't figure it out with. That's weird, right? And the number of guys they've had come in here and just develop them into quality players, and you hand them the most athletic DT that's ever tested, and they couldn't make him a player. And he's been in one or two other spots, I believe. I think it was with Pittsburgh for a little bit. And then, as I said, Jacksonville didn't stick anywhere, not in the league right now, as far as I know. GM Island Empire said Sherwood's going to become that beast, the whole BFL backfield. I think, BFL, NFL typo. The whole NFL will take notice and try to trade for him. He's scratching the surface. Dylan Terman and I talked about the preseason, and that was a really good point by Dylan. While I was saying Sherwood's ready to start, Sherwood, I think, is going to make a significant jump. Dylan was saying, what if you trade him? Like, what if you want to pick and you feel like Mosley's going to be back next year? I thought, because of financials, I think there's an outside shot Mosley's back. But now that Sherwood is showing it in live games, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he gets re-signed and starts. I mean, listen, he may take over at some point this year. It might be matchup specific. The Jets might say, look, CJ Mosley, you're the captain, you're the veteran. We've got the respect for you. You're going to play. But when teams are in situations, whether it be passing situations or when you want a linebacker covering a tight end, covering a quicker back, that's where you go to Sherwood, the former safety, and let him use those cover skills and rotate those guys out. But that was, I believe, when we did our prediction show, I believe that was one of mine, is that I'm quite sure it was one of mine, that we are going to see Jamie and Sherwood get significantly more reps this year than last year. I just felt like the progress, the improvement year to year was going to be too much for the Jets to keep him out as CJ Mosley got another year older. But look, it's only week 3. He only got him because of an injury. I'm not saying, I'm not doing a victory lap saying, haha, I was right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he doesn't, it was one game because of injury that he got reps. But I feel pretty comfortable saying that that Sherwood will get more reps this year than last, even if Mosley is healthy. So not bad. Not a bad run for Joe Douglas. Again, I get that some of these guys aren't here anymore. So it's kind of like, well, who cares? Who cares if it's a hit? Is it a hit? Can you consider a player a hit? Wild Wave, how we doing? Sports Wicker Media, how we doing? Can you consider a guy a hit if he doesn't play for your team or doesn't play well for your team? I often said that with James Farrier. People would say, oh, Parcells, Bill Parcells with the Jets. Don't get me wrong, did some great things. Drafting was not one of them. He had a good class when he had the 4 first-rounders, but he had multiple classes of 10-plus picks where he got close to nothing. And one year he took James Farrier. And as a rookie, James Farrier was his first-round pick. As a rookie, terrible. Year 2, terrible. Year 3, not very good. Year 4, monster. Beast. Blew up. Left to go to the Steelers and had a phenomenal career there. Is that a hit? If you're the owner, you like that's I think the mindset I came up with. Yeah, Dorian Booze. Look, anyone who lived through those Parcells drafts, they know what happened with his picks. So much bad in there. So much bad. But the way I look at it is, if we're going to call a guy a hit for that team, I think, would you do it again? Would you use that first-round pick, that second-round pick on that player who didn't do anything for a couple of years and had one good year and left? I don't think you would. But these are guys, like I said, with the Joe Douglas situation, I don't think you can call them hits in terms of what they did for the Jets, but you can say, because what is the GM's job, right? Identify and acquire talented players, and especially through the draft, because that's where you get guys on the cheap for multiple years. Joe Douglas has done that well. Again, Elijah Moore could have been a better pick if you picked a better person. Jason Pinnock, not a bad pick. And listen, I'm not saying he's great. I'm saying he's a starting player in the NFL. I mean, do we have to go back and go over the Mike McCagnon and Johnny Dick drafts to see what a bad draft really looks like? Um, so I don't believe a player has to be a superstar to be a hit. I don't believe a player has to be a starter to be a hit. Now, look, if you're talking first, second round, maybe, but even that to me is questionable. Like to me, a true miss. You draft a guy, he's not good enough, he's out of the league. That's a miss. You know, if you take a guy in the first round and he's an okay starter, like okay, fine, he's a bust in that he didn't reach your expectations, but he was still an asset, still a player who contributed, who you were able to use. I don't think there's a better example of this than Brian Thomas. I mean, if you look at what was expected of Brian Thomas when he was drafted, you could say he was a bust from that perspective. You know, he ran this 4.45 40 as a defensive end out of UAB. He's going to get to the quarterback. Turns out he wasn't going to get to the quarterback, but 10-year starter. You tell me a 10-year starter is a bust because he didn't get enough sacks? I have a hard time because I've seen Vernon Golston. You know, I know what a bust is. A 10-year starter isn't a bust. Short of expectations, fine. But that's the thing with a bust. There's no true definition. It's subjective, and people have their own ideas of what a bust is. But not many of these two Joe Douglas drafts. Listen, this most recent class, a little too early to say what. The previous year, we can talk a little bit. Like I said, that's what got me to log on and do the quick breakdown of the 2 years before that. Because yeah, last year's class, some guys are playing well, some guys are showing some good signs. Some guys, listen, Jarek Bernard Converse, phenomenal in the preseason. Barnes, very good in the preseason. Carter Warren looked better in the preseason than he did last year. So some steps, but not quite at the level where they're playing at a high level in games as Will McDonald and Joe Tippmann are. But it looks like you might have a few more hits in that class to go along with Tippmann and McDonald, to go along with the 10. Well, again, 15 of 17 guys. Still, let's put it this way: 17 picks over a 2-year span. 15 of them are still collecting NFL paychecks as players, be it practice squad or all pro. So for those that say listen, if you say Joe Douglas only had one good draft, you can stand by that if you're subscribed to the philosophy that if you are not a superstar, you are not a good draft pick. That's fine. I can't. There's probably not a good GM in the NFL, or maybe only one or two, to people who think that way. But if you just dig into the numbers and look at hit rates around the league and look at what Joe Douglas has done, and especially when Sherwood does take over as a starter, because you're going to have another, I believe, high-level starter, very athletic linebacker. So you're going to have another high-level starter to add to the mix. I think Joe Douglas, again, you look at the rates around the league, you look at what he's managed to do, and it's a shame. It's a shame Elijah Moore was what he was from a personality standpoint. It's a shame to me. I mean, Michael Carter, nice enough player, but you can't be unhappy with what they've replaced him with. But again, 17 picks, 15 guys still getting checks. That is unbelievable. But I mean, listen, I'm not going to stay up all night combing all 32 teams, 21 and 22 draft classes. But I feel pretty comfortable saying there's not another GM out there. That's an 88% hit rate over a 2-year span. 88% of his guys are on rosters or collecting NFL checks. 58% are starters. So that's 53% roughly is the rate at which guys make it, like, stay in the league. That's talking special teamers, backups. Over that 2-year span, the Jets are at 58% starters. And that'll just tick up a little bit more when Jamie and Sherwood eventually takes over. So some good numbers there, some good data, some encouraging data. Listen, the last 2 years, I feel like Douglas has been a little too conservative and sort of drafting a lot of guys who are not going to play right away. But I'm not going to complain about the way this roster looks right now. I'm not going to complain about the draft when you look at, again, compared to other classes. So nice job by Joe. Interesting numbers. Broncos are up next. We will be live to preview that Thursday night. Myself, Dylan, and Chris Schubert, Dylan Zerman, and Chris Schubert. You can give me a follow at JN Radio _Glenn, and we'll be live between now and then if anything else goes down. We got something from Wild Wave here. Let me not ignore you here, Wild Wave. One thing I'll say is that I don't want JD to have an assistant GM. Yeah, well, that's I guess that's his call, right? Wild Wave. In a perfect world, he manages it himself, but I would think at some point, um, they they fill all the vacancies that were, and they may have actually. I'm trying to think that's a few months ago. Not sure. Again, he's going to do what he thinks he has to do to make his job easier, and hopefully just keeps hitting like this. I mean, it's unrealistic. You can't expect him to get 15 out of 17 on a consistent basis. But tell you what, give me 9, 10 out of 17, and I'll take it. That'll wrap it up for this one. Jets fans, have a good one.